My name is Scarlett. I'm 42 years old, and my son Andrew hasn't come home in 14 months. The house feels emptier every day since I told him his anxiety was just in his head. That single sentence shattered our relationship. Now I check my phone constantly, hoping for a message that never comes. I never understood mental health until I lost my son to my own ignorance. Before I share my story, where are you watching from today? If you've ever misunderstood someone you love, please subscribe and join our community of learning and healing. I was always the tough one, the survivor. Growing up in Portland, I prided myself on being unbreakable. As a single mother working 2 jobs in healthcare, I never had time for weakness. My life revolved around 12-hour shifts as a medical assistant, followed by evening receptionist work at a dental office. Every dollar went toward keeping our small 2-bedroom house in a decent neighborhood. I raised Andrew alone since he was 5 after his father decided family life wasn't for him. The divorce was quick and child support payments were inconsistent at best. I remember telling myself that we didn't need anyone else. We were a team, just the two of us against the world. Andrew was always different from me. While I was practical and straightforward, he was sensitive and artistic. Even as a young boy, he noticed everything. The way light filtered through leaves, how people's voices changed when they were upset. He felt things deeply, sometimes too deeply. As a child, he would come home from school troubled by things that seemed insignificant to me. A teacher's stern voice, a friend's casual comment, the chaos of the cafeteria. I would tell him, "Shake it off, buddy. Tomorrow is another day." I thought I was teaching him resilience. My own childhood taught me that emotions were luxuries we couldn't afford. My father worked at the lumber mill and came home exhausted. My mother cleaned houses and had no patience for tears. When I fell off my bike, they told me to get back up. When I failed a test, they told me to study harder. Feelings weren't discussed in our house. Problems were meant to be solved, not talked about. I brought that same philosophy to parenting. When Andrew would wake with nightmares, I would tell him they weren't real. When he worried about a test, I told him to prepare better. I thought I was preparing him for a harsh world. Our house was small but tidy, with worn furniture I kept clean despite the long hours I worked. Andrew's room was blue with sports posters I bought him, though he was more interested in drawing than athletics. I kept pushing him toward what I thought were normal boy activities, never recognizing that I was ignoring who he truly was. The signs were there in middle school. His teacher mentioned he seemed anxious during class presentations, sometimes freezing up completely. I told her he needed to practice more. The school counselor suggested he might benefit from learning some coping techniques for stress. I nodded politely while thinking they were being too soft on him. At home, I would find him breathing heavily before school, claiming he felt sick. I would check for fever, find none, and send him on his way. Being nervous is part of growing up, I would say. You have to push through it. I remember one morning when he couldn't tie his shoes because his hands were shaking. I took over, tied them quickly, and hurried him out the door. "You just need to be stronger," I said. I never stopped to ask why his hands were shaking in the first place. I thought I was teaching him to be tough. I never realized I was teaching him to hide his pain. High school changed everything. Andrew's anxiety, which had been building through middle school, erupted like a volcano I couldn't ignore. Except I did ignore it, calling it dramatic teenage behavior instead of the serious condition it was. During his sophomore year, Andrew had his first major panic attack during a class presentation. His English teacher called me at work. She described how he had started sweating profusely, his voice shaking until he couldn't speak. When his classmates noticed, he bolted from the room and locked himself in a bathroom stall for 45 minutes. When I picked him up from school that day, instead of comfort, I offered comparison. "Jason from next door never has these problems, and he has presentations too. You need to toughen up." I watched his face fall, but I pressed on. "Everyone gets nervous. You're making it worse by focusing on it." That became our pattern. Andrew would show signs of distress, and I would dismiss them. When he didn't want to go to school dances, I called him antisocial. When he avoided the cafeteria, I said he was being picky. When he spent weekends in his room rather than going out with friends, I accused him of being lazy. What I didn't see then was how hard he was fighting just to appear normal. I didn't notice that his fingernails were bitten to the quick. I missed how he developed rituals, checking his backpack 3 times before leaving, or how he would wear the same lucky shirt on test days. His grades began to slip junior year. His history teacher emailed that Andrew seemed distracted and jumpy in class. The school counselor requested a meeting, which I rescheduled twice due to work before reluctantly attending. She sat across from me with Andrew's file open on her desk. "I'm concerned about Andrew's anxiety levels," she said. "I'd like to recommend a therapist who specializes in adolescent anxiety disorders." I remember feeling defensive immediately. He doesn't have a disorder. He's just going through a phase. With all due respect, Mrs. Walker, what Andrew is experiencing goes beyond normal teenage stress. He described feeling like he's drowning even when nothing stressful is happening. I shook my head. Therapy is expensive, and I don't think it's necessary. He just needs to learn to handle pressure better. On the drive home, Andrew stared out the window silently. When I told him my thoughts about the counselor being overly concerned, he simply said, "You don't get it, Mom. You never have." Those words stung, but instead of listening, I lectured him about respect. After that, Andrew stopped telling me about his symptoms. I'd find him in the bathroom splashing water on his face, and he'd claim allergies. I'd hear him pacing at night, and he'd say he was just stretching. He learned that sharing his struggle only led to judgment. My coworkers noticed my increasing frustration. During lunch breaks, I would vent about Andrew's behavior. My friend Tara gently suggested that anxiety could be a real medical issue, but I brushed her off. "My son doesn't have anxiety. He has an attitude problem." At home, our arguments escalated. "You need to toughen up," became my mantra. Each time I said it, Andrew withdrew further into himself. The close relationship we had during his childhood eroded bit by bit, replaced by tense silences and superficial conversations. One evening, I found him researching anxiety symptoms online. Instead of seeing this as a cry for help, I took away his laptop. "Stop convincing yourself there's something wrong with you," I said. "The more you read about this stuff, the more you'll imagine you have it." He looked at me with such profound disappointment that, for a moment, I almost reconsidered my approach. But my pride and ignorance won out. I was so certain I knew better than everyone else, including my own son. By the end of his senior year, Andrew and I were like strangers living under the same roof. I blamed teenage rebellion. I blamed his sensitive nature. I blamed everything except my own failure to listen and understand. When Andrew left for State University 3 hours away, I thought distance would improve our relationship. Maybe some time apart would reset things between us. I helped him move into his dorm, arranging his belongings, while giving practical advice about laundry and budgeting. As we said goodbye, we shared a tearful hug that gave me hope. "This is your fresh start," I told him, genuinely excited for his future. Privately, I thought college would make him grow out of his phase. Being around other students dealing with real stress would show him that his problems were minor in comparison. During his first semester, things seemed better. Our phone calls were short but pleasant. He talked about his classes, particularly enjoying his Introduction to Psychology course. I noticed he didn't mention making many friends, but I didn't press the issue. No news was good news, I thought. He came home for Thanksgiving, spending most of the time catching up on sleep. When relatives asked about school, his answers were brief but positive. I interpreted his quietness as maturity rather than withdrawal. We managed 4 days without a significant argument, which felt like progress. Christmas break was similar. Andrew spent time in his room, emerging for meals and occasional movie nights. When I suggested he reconnect with high school friends, he made vague excuses. I chose not to push, grateful for the peaceful coexistence we had established. The second semester started smoothly. Andrew seemed to have found his rhythm with classes. Our weekly calls became routine, with him sharing small victories like a good grade on a paper or finding a quiet study spot in the library. I felt relief believing we had weathered the storm of his teenage years. Then came finals week in May. I was working a night shift when my phone rang at 2 in the morning. Seeing Andrew's name, I stepped into the break room to answer. "Mom." His voice was barely audible, his breathing rapid and shallow. "Andrew, what's wrong?" I could hear the panic in his voice immediately. "I can't breathe. My heart's racing. I think I'm dying." The words came between gasps. My medical training kicked in. "Are you having chest pain? Should I call an ambulance?" No, ambulance." He was crying now. This has been happening all week, but tonight it's worse. I'm scared, Mom. For a moment, maternal instinct overrode my usual dismissiveness. Try to slow your breathing, honey. In through the nose, out through the mouth. I talked him through breathing exercises for several minutes. As his breathing steadied, relief washed over me. But then came my critical mistake. "You're okay now," I said. "It's just stress from finals. Everyone goes through this." His voice changed, became smaller. "This isn't normal stress, Mom. This is what I've been trying to tell you for years." Instead of hearing his pain, I reverted to my default position. "It's just in your head, Andrew. You need to get over it. You're making it worse by focusing on it so much." The silence that followed was deafening. When he finally spoke, his voice was flat, defeated. "I have to go. Andrew, wait. Thanks for your help, Mom." The formal tone struck me as odd, but I didn't recognize it as the turning point it was. "Try to get some sleep," I said, already thinking about getting back to my patients. "You'll feel better in the morning." "Good night." He hung up. I returned to my shift unaware that those words had just fractured our relationship in ways I wouldn't understand for months. Over the next few weeks, Andrew's texts became infrequent and formal. When I called, he would say he was busy with end-of-term projects or studying. I attributed his distance to normal college stress and gave him space. When he texted that he had passed all his finals, I responded with celebration emojis and told him how proud I was. His response was a simple thanks. I didn't recognize this new brevity as a wall being built between us. As summer break approached, I excitedly prepared for his return. I cleaned his room, bought his favorite foods, and even took a few days off work to spend time together. I was certain that being home would return things to normal. I was wrong. Andrew arrived home on a sunny afternoon in June. As he walked through the door, I noticed changes immediately. He had lost weight. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. His smile seemed forced, not reaching his eyes at all. "Welcome home." I hugged him, feeling how tense he was in my embrace. "I've missed you so much." "Thanks," he said quickly, stepping away. "I need to unpack." Over dinner, I tried to engage him in conversation, but his responses were minimal. When I asked about his plans for summer, he mentioned looking for a local job, but offered no details. "Is everything okay?" I finally asked. "Everything's fine," he replied, not meeting my eyes. "Just tired from the drive." I gave him space that evening, assuming he needed to decompress. The next day was similar. Andrew stayed in his room most of the time, emerging only for meals or to use the bathroom. When I suggested activities we might do together, he would claim he had reading to catch up on for fall classes. 3 days after his return, I went to put fresh towels in the bathroom and noticed a prescription bottle on the counter. Picking it up, I read the label "Sertraline prescribed for Andrew Walker by Dr. James Bennett." The date was from 2 months earlier. I confronted him in his room, bottle in hand. "What is this?" Andrew looked up from his laptop, his face draining of color. "That's private." "Sertraline, isn't that an antidepressant? When did you start taking medication?" "It's for anxiety," he said quietly. "And I've been taking it for about 2 months." 2 months? And you never thought to tell me who is Dr. Bennett? "A psychiatrist at the University Health Center." I felt a surge of anger and betrayal. "So you've been seeing a psychiatrist behind my back, getting medication without telling me?" Andrew closed his laptop. "I'm 20 years old, Mom. I don't need your permission for medical treatment." "But why would you hide this from me? And how do you know you even need this? Did you get a second opinion?" His expression hardened. "I was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder. It's not something I made up." "Diagnosed?" I scoffed. "Everyone has anxiety these days. It's the trendy diagnosis." Andrew stood up. "Do you hear yourself? This is exactly why I didn't tell you. You've never once taken my mental health seriously." "Because you're perfectly healthy. You've just convinced yourself something's wrong, because everyone's talking about anxiety and depression these days." His voice rose to match mine. "I've been struggling since I was 12 years old. I've had panic attacks that made me think I was dying. I've missed opportunities and lost friends because sometimes I can't even leave my room." "That's just a lack of willpower," I insisted. "These medications are just easy solutions for people who don't want to face challenges." Andrew's face flushed with anger. "You have no idea what you're talking about. You work in healthcare, but you're completely ignorant about mental health. Don't you dare speak to me that way. I raised you better than this. You raised me to believe that my suffering wasn't real, he shot back. Do you know how many nights I've lain awake feeling like a failure because my own mother thought I was just weak? This diagnosis is trendy nonsense, I said dismissively. You've let these university doctors fill your head with labels instead of teaching you to be resilient. Andrew stared at me for a long moment, then began pulling clothes from his dresser and shoving them into his backpack. What are you doing? I asked. I'm going to stay with Jake, he said, referring to a high school friend who lived nearby. I can't be here right now. Panic rose in my chest. Don't be ridiculous, you just got home. He continued, packing his movements jerky with anger. I've spent my entire life being told that what I feel isn't real, that I'm just weak or dramatic or seeking attention. I can't do it anymore, especially not when I'm finally getting help. I tried to block his path as he headed for the door. Andrew, you're overreacting. Let's talk about this calmly. He stopped looking directly into my eyes. For years, I felt broken, like there was something fundamentally wrong with me, because I couldn't just toughen up like you wanted. Do you know what Dr. Bennett told me in our first session? He said, your anxiety is not your fault, and it doesn't make you weak. That was the first time in my life anyone had ever said that to me. His words hit me like a physical blow, but my pride wouldn't let me back down. These doctors are enabling you. Andrew shouldered his backpack. I'm not coming back until you educate yourself about mental health. I deserve better than this. As he walked out the door, I called after him. This is ridiculous. You're acting like a child. He turned back one last time. No, Mom. For the first time, I'm acting like someone who respects himself enough to walk away from people who don't believe his pain is real. The door closed behind him with a finality that left me standing in shocked silence. My first reaction was anger. How dare he walk out? How dare he speak to me that way after everything I'd sacrificed for him? I tried calling him that evening, but he didn't answer. I left voicemails that gradually shifted from angry to pleading. This is unacceptable behavior, Andrew. Then later, please call me back. We need to talk about this. And finally, I'm worried about you. Just let me know you're safe. Jake's mother called to assure me Andrew was staying with them and was okay. She was cool and distant, making me wonder what Andrew had told them about me. Days passed with no contact. When I finally received a text, it wasn't what I expected. I've taken a summer job at Barton's bookstore and found a room to rent nearby. I'll get the rest of my things when you're at work next Tuesday. My son wasn't coming home. The realization hit me like a physical blow. He had made arrangements to avoid spending the summer with me, and I had driven him away with my words. July passed in a blur of missed calls and unanswered texts. When Andrew came to get his belongings while I was at work, he left his house key on the kitchen counter. That small gesture hurt more than I could have imagined. He was formally disconnecting from our home. August brought my birthday, which Andrew acknowledged with a simple text. Happy birthday, hope you're well. The formal tone from my once affectionate son felt like a knife twisting in my heart. I drove past Barton's bookstore twice, hoping to catch a glimpse of him. The second time I saw him through the window arranging books on a display table. He was smiling as he talked with a coworker, looking more relaxed than I had seen him in years. I didn't go in. It felt like I would be intruding on his new life, a life he had created specifically to exclude me. As summer turned to fall, I expected Andrew to return to university. A brief text confirmed my assumption. Heading back to campus tomorrow. My stuff is stored at Jake's parents' house. No mention of saying goodbye, no suggestion of reconnecting before he left. September and October passed with only perfunctory communication. I would text asking how classes were going. He would respond with one-word answers. Fine. Busy. Okay. I sent care packages that he acknowledged with brief thanks. The emotional distance between us seemed to grow with each passing week. When November arrived, I began planning for Thanksgiving, hoping the holiday might provide an opportunity for reconciliation. I texted Andrew 3 weeks in advance. Would love to have you home for Thanksgiving. Let me know what time to expect you. His response came 2 days later. Sorry, can't make it home this year, staying on campus to work on a research project. I called immediately, but he didn't answer. I left a voicemail trying to sound casual, despite my breaking heart. Andrew, it's Mom. I got your text. I'm really disappointed you won't be home for Thanksgiving. It won't be the same without you. Please reconsider. He texted back rather than calling, "Decision is final, sorry." Thanksgiving was a lonely affair. I worked a shift at the hospital to avoid sitting alone with an uneaten turkey. My coworkers invited me to join their family gatherings, but I declined. The thought of watching other mothers with their children was too painful to bear. December brought more heartbreak. 2 weeks before Christmas, Andrew informed me he had accepted an invitation to spend the holiday with his roommate's family in Colorado. It's a good networking opportunity. His dad works in the field I want to get into. I responded with uncharacteristic vulnerability. I miss you, Andrew. The house isn't the same without you. Please come home, even if it's just for a day or two. His response was delayed and brief. Need space right now? Maybe spring break. That evening, scrolling through social media, trying to feel connected to my son's life, I found a post he had shared about toxic family dynamics and setting boundaries. The comments section was filled with supportive messages from friends I didn't recognize, saying things like, "Stay strong," and "Your mental health comes first." Was that how he saw me now, as toxic? The mother who had worked 2 jobs to keep a roof over our heads, who had nursed him through chickenpox and helped with science fair projects, was now being classified as someone to set boundaries against. My initial reaction was indignant anger. How ungrateful. How dramatic. But as I sat alone in our empty house surrounded by Christmas decorations that now seemed pointless, something began to shift inside me. What if he was right? The question appeared in my mind unbidden and unwelcome. I tried to dismiss it, but it persisted. What if Andrew had been suffering all these years and I had been too blind to see it? What if my dismissal of his anxiety had caused real harm? I remembered the prescription bottle, sertraline. I searched for information online and found myself reading clinical studies about anxiety disorders, symptoms, treatments. The descriptions matched behaviors I had observed in Andrew for years. The racing thoughts, the physical symptoms, the avoidance behaviors. More painfully, I found articles about the impact of having one's anxiety dismissed by family members. The shame, the self-doubt, the deterioration of trust. Around midnight, I found myself digging through a box of Andrew's old school papers. Report cards and teacher comments I had ignored at the time now jumped out at me. Andrew seems anxious during class discussions. Andrew would benefit from learning relaxation techniques to manage test anxiety. Andrew has potential, but his anxiety seems to be interfering with his participation. The evidence had been there all along. Professional educators had tried to alert me to my son's struggles, and I had dismissed them just as I had dismissed him. Christmas came and went. I sent Andrew a gift card with a note thinking of you. He sent a text, "Thanks for the gift card." No gift for me arrived. I told myself I deserved that. My friends began to comment on my changed demeanor. I was quieter, more thoughtful. When Tara asked if I was okay, I finally confided in her. "I think I've been wrong about Andrew all along. I think I've hurt him deeply." Her response was gentle but honest. "I've wondered if that might be the case. My sister has an anxiety disorder. The symptoms you've described in Andrew sound very familiar." "Why didn't you say something?" I asked, not accusingly but genuinely curious. "I tried a few times. You were very certain about your perspective." Another piece of the puzzle fell into place. I had been so convinced of my rightness that even my friends couldn't get through to me. My education about mental health began in earnest after the new year. I checked out books from the library about anxiety disorders. I found online forums for parents of children with anxiety. I watched documentaries about mental health stigma. Each new piece of information was both illuminating and painful. I recognized Andrew in so many descriptions. More distressingly, I recognized myself in accounts of parents who had unintentionally worsened their children's conditions through dismissal and criticism. In February, I made an appointment with a therapist for myself. Dr. Lisa Kaminsky specialized in family relationships. In our first session, I broke down as I described the situation with Andrew. "I think I've been wrong all along," I admitted through tears. "I've been telling him to toughen up when he was already fighting battles I couldn't see." Dr. Kaminsky nodded. "Many parents struggle to understand invisible disabilities. You grew up in a generation that didn't talk about mental health." "That's no excuse," I said. I work in healthcare. I should have known better. Perhaps, but beating yourself up won't help repair your relationship with Andrew. What matters now is what you're willing to learn and how you're willing to change. Over the next few sessions, we explored my own upbringing and how it had shaped my parenting. My parents' emphasis on self reliance, the stigma attached to emotional vulnerability in my childhood home, the way I had internalized messages about toughening up and passed them on to my son. You're repeating patterns, Dr. Kaminsky explained. Breaking those patterns requires awareness and consistent effort. I also had to confront my pride and the defensive anger I felt whenever my parenting was questioned. I had been so invested in being right that I couldn't hear what Andrew had been trying to tell me for years. In March, a situation at work provided unexpected perspective. A young man came into the clinic with symptoms similar to those Andrew had described during his phone call the night of his panic attack. The doctor diagnosed an anxiety attack and treated the patient with compassion and medical attention. There was no suggestion that he should toughen up or that his symptoms were all in his head. Watching this interaction, I felt a wave of shame. This stranger had received more validation from medical professionals than my own son had received from me. That evening, I wrote Andrew a letter. Not an email or a text, but an actual handwritten letter. I apologized for dismissing his anxiety. I acknowledged the pain I had caused. I told him I was educating myself about anxiety disorders and seeing a therapist to understand my harmful behaviors. I expressed my love and my hope that someday he might forgive me enough to let me back into his life, even if just as a peripheral figure. I mailed the letter knowing he might not respond. It wasn't about getting a reaction. It was about taking responsibility for my actions, regardless of the outcome. 2 weeks passed with no acknowledgement of the letter. I continued my therapy and my education. I joined a support group for parents of children with anxiety disorders. Listening to other parents' stories, I recognized my own mistakes and gained insights into more supportive approaches. One mother shared how she had initially dismissed her daughter's anxiety as attention-seeking behavior. I kept telling her to just calm down as if she hadn't thought of that herself, she said with a sad laugh. Now I understand that telling someone with anxiety to calm down is like telling someone with a broken leg to just walk it off. That analogy hit home for me. How many times had I essentially told Andrew to walk off his mental health condition? At work, I found myself approaching patients differently. I listened more carefully to their concerns, especially when they described symptoms that weren't immediately visible. I stopped making assumptions about what they should be able to handle. One evening, I found a box of Andrew's childhood journals in the attic. With trepidation, I began reading them, seeking to understand the son I had failed to truly see. His entries from as young as 9 years old described feelings of worry and fear that went far beyond typical childhood concerns. He wrote about stomach aches before school, about feeling like his heart was going to explode during class presentations, about lying awake, worrying about things that might never happen. Reading these journals was excruciating. They provided undeniable evidence that Andrew had been suffering for years while I had been telling him to toughen up. I had been so focused on raising a resilient child that I had missed the child who was actually in front of me, the one who needed a different kind of support than the one I was providing. I understood now that if Andrew ever gave me another chance, I would need to approach our relationship completely differently. No more dismissing his feelings. No more comparing him to others. No more suggestions that he simply wasn't trying hard enough. I would need to listen, validate, and support rather than lecture and judge. The question was whether I would ever get that chance. After 6 months of silence, I sent Andrew a carefully worded text message. Not demanding, not guilt-tripping, just an honest expression of my changed perspective. I've been learning about anxiety disorders and reflecting on how I failed you. I'm deeply sorry for dismissing your experiences and making you feel unheard. I understand if you need more time and space. I'm here whenever or however you might want to reconnect. 3 days later, my phone lit up with his response. Thanks for saying that. It means a lot. Maybe we could try a video call next week. My hands trembled as I read his message. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was an opening a crack in the door I had feared was permanently closed. We scheduled the call for the following Tuesday evening. I spent the days leading up to it in a state of nervous anticipation, preparing what I wanted to say, but also reminding myself to listen more than speak. When Andrew's face appeared on my screen, I was struck by how much healthier he looked. His complexion was clearer, the dark circles gone from under his eyes. He had gained back some weight, and his posture was more relaxed. "Hi, Mom," he said, his voice cautious but not cold. "Andrew," I replied, fighting back tears. "It's so good to see your face." Our conversation started awkwardly. Small talk about his classes and my work, weather and books, safe topics that didn't touch on the 14 months of separation or the years of misunderstanding that had preceded it. Finally gathering my courage, I said what I had been preparing to say. "Andrew, I owe you a real apology. Not a quick 'I'm sorry,' but a genuine acknowledgement of how I hurt you. For years you tried to tell me about your anxiety, and I dismissed it. I told you it was all in your head when you were experiencing real pain. I made you feel weak when you were actually showing incredible strength, just by functioning with what I now understand is a significant anxiety disorder. I was wrong, and I'm deeply sorry." Andrew was quiet for a moment. Then he asked, "What changed?" I told him about my journey over the past months, the research, the therapy, the support group, the realizations that had come slowly but profoundly. "I'm not asking for immediate forgiveness," I said. "I know trust has to be rebuilt over time. I just want you to know that I'm committed to understanding and doing better." Andrew nodded, then shared his own journey. "I've been in therapy consistently since that night I called you during finals. Dr. Bennett has helped me understand that my anxiety isn't a character flaw. It's a medical condition that responds to treatment." He described how combination of medication and cognitive behavioral therapy had given him tools to manage his symptoms. He talked about joining a campus support group for students with anxiety and finding community among people who understood his experiences. "The hardest part," he said, his voice growing quiet, "was accepting that you might never understand, that I might have to choose between my mental health and our relationship." His words cut deep, but I knew I deserved them. "I'm so sorry I put you in that position. No child should have to make that choice. The things you said that night about it being all in my head, about needing to get over it, they weren't new. They were just the final version of what you'd been saying my whole life, and I just couldn't hear it anymore. Not after I'd finally found people who validated what I was going through." I nodded, tears streaming down my face. "You deserve that validation from me first and foremost. I failed you as a mother." Andrew's expression softened slightly. "You didn't fail at everything. You worked incredibly hard to provide for us. You taught me a lot of valuable things. You just had this massive blind spot when it came to mental health." "I did," I acknowledged, "and I'm working to understand why that blind spot existed and how to eliminate it." By the end of our hour-long conversation, we had agreed to start with monthly video calls. No pressure, no expectations, just gradually rebuilding communication. Andrew was clear that he wasn't ready to visit home yet, and I respected that boundary without protest. As we prepared to end the call, I said, "I want you to know that I'm going to continue my education and therapy regardless of what happens between us. This isn't conditional or just for show. I genuinely want to understand and grow." Andrew nodded. "That's good to hear. This isn't just about us. It's about how you relate to everyone dealing with invisible struggles." His insight struck me. He was right. My dismissive attitude toward anxiety hadn't just hurt him. It had likely affected how I treated patients, friends, and colleagues over the years. "I'm proud of you, Mom," he said quietly before we signed off. "It takes courage to reconsider deeply held beliefs." Those words, simple as they were, felt like the first foundation stone in rebuilding our relationship. Over the following months, our conversations became more regular and less strained. Andrew shared more about his college experiences and his therapy journey. I shared my insights from support groups and books. We weren't back to normal because normal had been part of the problem. We were building something new, something healthier, 6 months after our first video call, Andrew agreed to meet in person at a coffee shop halfway between his campus and my home. Seeing him walk through the door, I had to resist the urge to rush forward and embrace him. Instead, I let him set the pace, grateful when he initiated a brief hug before sitting down. As we talked over lattes, I realized how much I had missed his smile, his gestures, the way his eyes lit up when he talked about subjects that interested him. These days, that included psychology and mental health advocacy areas he had become passionate about through his own treatment journey. "I'm thinking about switching my major," he told me, "from business to psychology. I want to help others who've gone through what I did." "I think you'd be wonderful at that," I said sincerely. "You have both personal experience and compassion." He looked at me thoughtfully. "There was a time when you would have tried to talk me out of that, said it wasn't practical." I nodded, acknowledging the truth in his statement. The old me would have. But I'm learning that following your authentic path is more important than following the most conventional one. The path to healing our relationship has been slow and is still ongoing. There are moments when old patterns threaten to resurface, when I have to bite back a dismissive comment or check my tendency to minimize emotional struggles. But each time I successfully choose a new response, our trust rebuilds a little more. I've learned that supporting someone with anxiety doesn't mean you have to walk on eggshells or avoid all challenging conversations. It means validating their experience before suggesting solutions. It means believing them when they tell you they're struggling, even when you can't see or understand their pain. It means respecting their need for accommodation without judgment. Most importantly, I've learned that sometimes the strongest thing we can do is admit when we've been wrong. Not defensively, not with qualifications, but wholly and sincerely. Andrew now visits home occasionally, though our relationship will never be exactly what it was before. In some ways, it's better, more honest, more respectful of boundaries, more appreciative of the time we do spend together. When I look back on that night when I told my son his anxiety was just in his head, I feel deep regret. But I also recognize it as the moment that eventually forced me to confront my harmful beliefs and begin a journey toward greater understanding. If you're watching this and recognize yourself in my story, either as the parent who doesn't understand or the child who hasn't been believed, please know that healing is possible. It takes time, effort, and humility, but relationships can be rebuilt after even the deepest breaches of trust. Have you ever had to admit you were wrong about something important? How did it change your relationships? Please share your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to our channel for more real conversations about family healing and personal growth. And remember to like and share this video if you know someone who might benefit from hearing that invisible pain is still real pain. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I wish you courage and compassion on your own path to understanding. Retry Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.